Good morning, everyone. The House Appropriations Subcommittee on School Aid and the Department of Education is called to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Representative Weiss.
Here.
Representative Morgan.
Here.
Representative Kolazar.
Here.
Representative Steckloff.
Present.
Representative Price.
Here.
Representative Skaggs. Representative Wilson. Representative DeBoer.
Here.
Representative Green.
Present.
Representative Meerman.
Here.
Representative Beeson.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. And Vice Chair Morgan moves to approve the minutes from March 7th, 2024. Without any objection, the minutes are approved. And today we have two important presentations that on how we spend some of our school aid dollars. So we're going to focus on both early on education for some of our 0 to 3-year-olds and also focus on out of school time as well. So first up, I want to welcome up to present on early on Dr. Nicole Patrice Hamp, Christy Callahan, Terry, and I'm apologize if I say anyone's name wrong, Terry Melchert, Victoria Martinez, Kay Dubé to present. I don't know if you're all coming up together. Yes? Okay, great.
Esteemed committee members, thank you for having us. Today, we are testifying in support of increased state funding for Early On Michigan, our state's early intervention system. My name is Dr. Nicole Hamp. I'm a developmental behavioral pediatrician, medical director and owner of Arbor Autism in Ypsilanti, Michigan, an adjunct clinical assistant professor at the University of Michigan Medical School. I sit on the boards of directors for Autism Alliance of Michigan and the Early On Michigan Foundation, and serve as a state liaison to the Council on Early Childhood for the American Academy of Pediatrics. My research and advocacy efforts focus on ways to improve early identification and evaluation of children with developmental delays and disabilities, and I'm here today on my own time. I'm a lifelong Michigander and now live in Ann Arbor, Michigan in House District 23. Glad to see you here, Representative Morgan. In the United States, 1 in 6 children has a developmental delay or disability, and 1 in 36 children has autism spectrum disorder. This means that on average, in a kindergarten classroom of 20 children, there should be 3 students with a history of developmental delay, and across 2 classrooms, at least 1 child with autism. Research has shown that interventions provided to children with or at risk of developmental delay are most beneficial when offered at a very early age. From a neurodevelopmental perspective, this makes sense. The first 5 years of a child's life, and especially the first 3, are crucial to brain growth and development. A baby is born with sparse neural circuitry. Then, with increasing age, there is tremendous growth in the brain, with an increase in both the number and complexity of connections between brain cells or neurons. Around 2 years of age, there is a peak in the number of these connections or synapses. At this point, a critical period of neurodevelopment occurs, which we refer to as synaptic pruning. During this time, effective connections are strengthened and the weak ones die away. This is an important developmental step and is thought to be largely dependent on input from our environment. So it stands to reason that if an infant or toddler with developmental delay or disability is identified and intervention begins either before or while brain connections are being established, he or she stands the best chance of achieving their optimal developmental outcomes. Part C of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which mandates that every state offer an early intervention program for children with delays between birth and 3 years of age, was created in 1986 to enhance the development of infants and toddlers with disabilities, minimize potential developmental delay, and reduce educational costs to our society by minimizing the need for special education services as children with disabilities reach school age. The primary goal of early intervention, or EI, is to support families in promoting their child's optimal development and to facilitate the child's participation in family and community activities. Eligible children and their families are entitled to receive a broad range of services designed to maximize their development, including speech therapy, developmental and behavioral intervention, nutrition counseling, occupational and physical therapies, and social work services. Consistently in Michigan and nationally, nearly half of children enrolled in early intervention exhibit greater than expected growth, and that they acquire skills at a faster rate even after leaving the program. Infants and toddlers in early intervention experience increased motor, social, and cognitive functioning, improved acquisition of age-appropriate skills, reduced negative impacts of their disabilities. In fact, nationally, 54% of children who had received early intervention exited functioning at or above age level in overall academic skills. Additionally, 69% of children in the program, because of a risk condition, and 46% of children in the program for developmental delay were not enrolled in special education at kindergarten. It is estimated that every dollar spent on early childhood educational intervention saves at least $7.30 in future costs, and some studies have found that intervening early can save up to $17 for every dollar spent. This is after accounting for future education, health, and economic support costs. In general, early intervention services are 2.5 times less costly than special education services in preschool and elementary years. Yet, for some reason, early intervention has been historically ignored and underfunded in our state. Michigan didn't actually contribute any amount of state funding to the program until 2018. Furthermore, of the 3 possible eligibility criteria, we only offer services to 2 categories of children: those with diagnosed medical conditions and those with the 20% delay or more. Unlike other peer states, such as Illinois, Michigan has opted not to offer services for children at significant risk of delay due to factors such as homelessness, having a teen parent, or a parent with a history of substance abuse. Despite underinvesting in the program by at least $100 million, policymakers call on early intervention, or early on, as we call it in Michigan, to serve families in times of tragedy, like the Flint water crisis. Indeed, recent proposed legislation responding to new state requirements for universal lead screening would mandate pediatricians refer to early on when they identify a child with elevated blood lead levels. This would lead to a significant increase in caseloads for school districts across the state, and without a commensurate funding increase to support that work, all of the families who need these invaluable services will suffer. Furthermore, as our state takes its first steps towards offering universal pre-K, we have to consider what it means to provide a program that is really for all children. Setting the stage to offer a truly inclusive preschool environment means that we have to think about what is happening with families before their children walk into school for the first time. I know the state is planning to make a considerable contribution to MyLeap to make UPK a reality. But if you all don't increase your investment in early intervention in a meaningful way, this year and in every budget to come for the foreseeable future, you are setting our preschoolers up and their teachers up for failure. With a more robust system of early intervention, we will identify children with delays and start interventions well before they hit preschool. Through EI, we can identify children with special needs and either completely address their delay or transition them from an individualized family service plan in EI to an individualized education plan in special education so that they enter pre-K ready to learn. This also gives the schools and teachers a much better sense of what the true needs of their students are before they arrive in the building on their first day. Today, we have a very specific ask. We would like you to increase state early on funding by $15 million this year for a total of $37.3 million. In order to make Michigan the best state to have and raise a baby, we have to start at the beginning. Early intervention offered between birth and 3 years of age takes advantage of a time in a child's development when there is unlimited promise and potential. When it comes to childhood development, you can't start at the end or even partway through and work backwards. You can and you must start at the beginning. If you don't, you are undercutting every other investment you are making in education this year. It's not that those investments don't matter, it's just that they matter a little less. So let's start early and set Michigan children up for success. There's a lot of work to do, and this is a small start, but a significant one. An investment in early on is an investment in our future. Thank you.
Hello, thank you for listening to our testimony today. I'm Christy Callahan, Director of Innovative Projects at Clinton County RESA. Our office is a grantee for MDE and MyLeap. We carry out statewide activities to support early on. We operate 1-800 Early On so that parents, physicians, and child care providers can make referrals. We also provide professional development to personnel who work with eligible children and their families. Separately, I'm president of the Board of Directors for the Early On Michigan Foundation and chair of the Governmental Relations Committee for the Michigan Division for Early Childhood. These last two are volunteer roles. I'm here today on my own time. I grew up in Livonia at 5 Mile in Newburgh, and now I live in DeWitt, which is District 77. As we heard from Dr. Hamp, it's important to invest in the earliest years, as that is when we can have the most impact on the developmental trajectory of young children. Early On does just that, supporting families who have infants and toddlers birth to age 3 with developmental delays and disabilities. Every state has an early intervention system. Ours is called Early On Michigan. It is established under Part C of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, the same act that authorizes special education. Infants and toddlers are eligible for Early On if they have a 20% delay in development or an established medical condition that is likely to result in delay. Services are provided in the natural environment, mostly the home, so that parents and families have the support that they need in order to support the unique needs of their babies and toddlers who may have challenges in crawling, talking, walking, eating, etc. Providers include speech therapists, occupational therapists, physical therapists, teachers, social workers, psychologists, and more. Prior to Part C and Early On, Michigan was a pioneer in providing special education services to infants and toddlers since 1971, before the federal mandate in 1986. Since we had this state special education system in place when Early On was created, we ended up with 2 populations served under Early On. Remember, a child has to have a 20% delay or medical condition to qualify for Early On. And of those, only 42% of children in Early On qualify as eligible under special education, which provides access to personnel who are reimbursed through special education. Here, you can see the number of infants and toddlers served, 12,907 on count day, over 26,000 annually. 42% of our children also qualify for special education services, which brings more frequent services and highly qualified personnel. Often, children in Early On are served by personnel who meet only the minimum standard for Early On personnel, which can be a bachelor's degree or even a high school diploma plus training. 58% of our children do not qualify for special education, which can mean less frequent services by personnel who are less prepared, which is inadequate to meet the needs of children who could really benefit from more intensive support. Our identification rate is about 4% and reflects the number of infants and toddlers served, birth to 3, as a percentage of the population. As our state allocation for Early On has grown modestly, Michigan's rate of identification is also steadily increasing. However, we're still consistently below the national average. We know that the Michigan K-12 special education identification rate is about 13%, and so there are likely many more children who would be eligible for services. In 2023, Early On Public Awareness processed 21,845 referrals. This number does not include those referrals that go directly to the ISDs. You can see that we've significantly surpassed our pre-pandemic levels, as we have a 27% increase since 2019. Currently, support for early on includes $14.5 million in federal Part C of IDEA funding, $22.3 million in School Aid 54D funds, reimbursement through special education for the personnel serving that subpopulation, and inequitable millage funding throughout the state. Just recently, the American Institutes for Research produced a cost study funded by the Michigan Department of Education through preschool development grant funds that estimates that a high-quality early intervention system in Michigan would cost approximately $230 million. We know that the most recent increase in funds through 54D have made a difference. A survey of ISDs in 2022 found that 100% of all respondents reported that as a result of increased funds, they either increased the frequency of early on services and/or hired more qualified staff to perform evaluations and provide additional services. We have several reasons to increase investment in early on. Number one, the science of brain development tells us that investing and intervening in the earliest years has the potential to make the most significant gains for our young children. Number two, with pre-K for all expansion, we want our youngest learners birth to 3 to receive the supports and services they need to position them for success. Number three, with the new requirement for universal lead screening, more infants and toddlers will be referred to early on than ever before. Number four, the demand is there. More infants and toddlers are eligible for than our system can adequately serve. We must strengthen the early on infrastructure that supports them. Number five, an increase of $15 million in Section 54D to $37.3 million would make a difference for our Michigan families and their young children. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Terry Melchert. I'm an occupational therapist and the early on facilitator at Southline Community Schools in Oakland County. I'm here today to talk about our early on system and some of its challenges. Early on is a complicated system that is divided into 2 parts. One group consists of infants and toddlers with a 20% delay in at least one developmental domain or an established health condition like cleft palate, prenatal drug exposure, or lead exposure, which is likely to lead to a delay. We refer to these children as early on only. The second group of children are those we refer to as early on and special education. Because Michigan School Code provides special education services to infants and toddlers who meet the eligibility criteria identified in the Michigan Administrative Rules for Special Education. In other words, we have 2 very distinct groups of children in Michigan's early on system. One is eligible for early on only, and one is eligible for early on in special education. All of the children receive an Individualized Family Service Plan, or IFSP, and all children are entitled to the provision of federally mandated early intervention services. This bifurcated system is important to understand because it impacts the funding available to our youngest and most vulnerable children. Early on only children are not eligible for the funding and associated services that special education eligible children receive, which is not equitable, especially for a statewide system that is supposed to be comprehensive and coordinated. When children are eligible for both early on and special education, the state of Michigan provides fiscal support under Section 52, per pupil foundation allowance, or Section 51A, in cost reimbursement. On the other hand, children who are eligible as Part C only cannot access those funds or the service providers funded through those funding streams. Up until 2018, services for these children were generally covered through local special education millage funds and federal Part C of IDEA funds that are disseminated to each intermediate school district from MDE. However, per federal legislation, the Part C funds were not appropriated to pay for services and are grossly inefficient to do so. The intent of the federal Part C dollars was to build interagency partnerships and facilitate coordination for payment. Yet, until 2018, those federal funds were the only source of payment for Michigan's early on only eligible children. Since then, Michigan has created a line item within the state school aid budget for early on to increase services for infants and toddlers with disabilities. Today, Section 54D is $22.3 million. This has allowed our county to hire 17 special education certified employees to provide services to early on only eligible children, which has tripled the frequency of services prior to 2019. This is significant because the disparities in funding within the two groups of early on eligible children determine what services and supports children have access to. The type and frequency of services that families receive is a function of resources and funding. Because we have not built one efficient system with equal access to funding streams, early on only children are often offered minimal services and service providers. For example, 65% of children who were early on only received less than one visit per month, while 81% of children who were early on and special education eligible received services weekly or twice a week. In terms of the array of services and providers to whom children and families have access, again, the disparity between the two groups of children is glaring. Early on only children have consistently less access to federally qualified personnel, again, due to funding limitations. Most of our state has had to create two service delivery systems, one of early on only providers and one that includes special education providers. These teams tend to vary greatly in background and credentials, with early on only families typically limited to a finite group of providers, such as nurses or social workers, with no access to speech and language pathologists, occupational therapists, physical therapists, and special education teachers. As state funds are added to the early intervention system through Section 54D, many service areas have finally been able to hire federally required personnel to serve early on only children, mirroring the providers available to children who are also eligible for special education. This is important because it qualified and certified professionals who have expertise in infants and toddlers with disabilities leads to the best outcomes for children and their families. Michigan has a complex early intervention system, and I would be remiss to ignore the systemic issues that make this work difficult at the local level. Our system can be hard to understand, even as an early childhood provider. I'm sure it's hard for you to understand it too. Imagine how difficult it is for a parent to understand. Increased funding will reduce the disparities that currently exist between our early on only and our early on and special education students. It will create an early on system that ensures that all children with developmental delays and disabilities have access to the array of qualified providers required by federal law and the frequency of services needed to meet their unique needs during the most critical window of development in their lives. Thank you. And now I'd like to introduce Victoria Martinez, and she's going to join us via Zoom.
Hello, my name is Victoria Martinez, and I'm a parent of a child who received early on services. My daughter was born with Down syndrome and started her early on journey at 3 months of age. Without this foundation, I'm sure her educational experience would have been vastly different due to her delays. Without those services she received, the gap between her and her non-disabled peers would have been significantly larger, not allowing her to be fully included with them in kindergarten. This would have significantly changed her life trajectory in the K-12 system and made her feel isolated and segregated. Due to her services and early on, my daughter has been included in the general education classroom since attending Early Head Start at 3 years old. Increased funding for early on would give more families like mine a better foundation for their child to transition into preschool and kindergarten. As my colleagues have mentioned, special education services for older students are more expensive, and early on bridges that gap for children and prevents them from needing as many services later on. Early on helped me as a parent start my leadership journey in special education. I learned so much when researching and advocating for my daughter in early on, which gave me the expertise to sit on my local interagency coordinating council, Michigan Interagency Coordinating Council, Special Education Advisory Committee, and my local parent advisory committee in Wayne County. My passion for early intervention has led me to work with families across the state as the early on liaison for Michigan Alliance for Families, the state's parent training and information center. In my leadership journey, I've heard from many parents about how great their early on services have been. For example, a family in my local parent advisory committee truly loved their early on experience from start to finish, and their child is now thriving in school. However, I've also heard from parents whose experiences could have been better. I know a family who was told by their pediatrician at 2.5 years old that they need to look into early on for speech. And when they finally received an evaluation, the early on provider, who was sent to their home, was underqualified to perform the thorough evaluation, that their child needed. Because of this, and the fact that the child was already 2.5 years old, the family was told that they were better off to wait until 3 and be evaluated by their local school district for special education services. This child was then evaluated and found eligible for an IEP for speech services. Imagine how this family would have been supported in building their child's language skills if early on had more funding to do family outreach and make more connections in the community. This family could have started receiving services before their child's second birthday instead of being stuck without any intervention services. Families are not usually familiar with early intervention services, and their pediatricians often fail to refer families in a timely manner. Additionally, there are families who are not receiving enough services or services frequently enough to meet their child's needs, which causes them to exit the early on system prematurely. Then there are families who aren't getting any support due to a lack of child-find activities in their community. These families have never been identified or even made aware that their child could be eligible. Increased funding for early on would allow more children and families to be found eligible earlier, which would better prepare them for social, academic, and life success. Thank you so much.
Good morning. My name is Kay Dubé, and I'm here to share the parent and early childhood perspective of early on. Like I just said, I'm a parent of a child who received early intervention at 18 months old through early on. My son Lee had a significant speech and language delay, as well as some other diagnoses later on. He was completely nonverbal until the age of 2, and when he did begin to speak, he had a number of articulation and phonological disorders. In addition to the speech delay, he was also diagnosed with sensory processing disorder, and I can tell you the child who is unable to regulate, but also unable to effectively communicate is extremely frustrating for both the parent and child. We did not have the perfect early on experience, and quite frankly, we did not get all the services that he or we as parents needed, but in the end, he exited early on as special education eligible. He received an IEP through our local school district at 3 years old. That single connection is what eventually led us to the outside OT and social worker services that he needed to thrive and excel. And I would have never known how to navigate that system or even known that it was available at that age without early on. Early on was the bridge for Lee to get the services that he needed, and today he is a happy, healthy, socially, emotionally, and academically successful almost 13-year-old. And I can tell you without a doubt that he and my family would not be where we are today without early on. You might wonder why I pushed so hard to get Lee's services or why I accepted them so willingly. And I have the unique experience of being able to speak not only from the parent and professional lens, but also as a sibling. I have a brother, Ted, who has a mental illness, and he was in great need of early intervention. But being born in the 70s and being raised in the 80s and really even into the 90s, mental health and understanding of it, it was in its infancy. So the support that he really needed, it just didn't exist. My parents really did try to get him support, but like I said, it just didn't exist. And in fact, a pediatrician told my mom, well, he's not a cool kid. And that was literally the kind of help that they received. Unsurprisingly, he struggled socially and academically, ultimately dropping out of school. He turned to drugs and alcohol to self-medicate, and that led to a near-fatal heroin overdose. So why was Ted's outcome so different than Lee's? And the only difference is that Lee received early intervention services, and Ted didn't. So if you look, Ted had little to no supports or services, which led to social and academic struggles. That directly led to the poor coping skills and the drug and alcohol use. That 100% led directly into chronic joblessness and homelessness. It took him 44 years to gain any amount of stability in his life. Then you look at Lee. Lee received those early intervention services at 18 months old through early on. He had the IEP. He received the social worker and the OT services, which meant that he was socially, emotionally, and academically ready at the time of school entry, which has led to social, emotional, and academic success. Lee was set up to succeed, and my brother was set up to fail. If this is the only thing that you take away from what I tell you today, is that early intervention is literally life-altering for the children who receive it, like Lee, and for those who don't, like Ted. So taking my parent and sibling perspective off and looking at things through an early intervention and childhood lens, it is imperative for children to have these services to have those positive outcomes. 80% of a child's brain develops by the age of 3. Birth to 3 is a critical time for growth and development, and we need to ensure that all children are supported. Michigan does have several health and educational services for children, but the vast majority are prevention-based with the focus on preventing those adverse outcomes. I agree that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of intervention, but once a child has been established to have had a delay or disability, we are not looking at prevention anymore. We need intervention. And Early On is an intervention program that specifically focuses on children with delays and disabilities. In addition, the majority of these services and programs also have income eligibility, oftentimes excluding families in that ALS threshold and making them ineligible for services, regardless of that children having delays or disabilities. Early On is one of the very few programs that does not have the income eligibility, ensuring that children who are in most need of supports and services are eligible, because we know that children who are born with established health conditions or are determined to have a delay or disability are at higher risk of having those poor outcomes without intervention. So it is essential that they receive those supports and services. I've talked a lot today about what makes Early On great and why we really need to have it and why it's so important, but there are absolutely some continued unmet needs. The primary need is additional funding. When we have less funding, there's less support for that to be in place, so there's less staff, less families served. We're seeing higher number of referrals of children since the pandemic and an even higher neurodivergent population. In addition to the overall higher referral rates, we know that large populations of the captive referrals, which is the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act, which have also increased, are resulting in families declining services. There's several schools of thought as to why this is happening, but in the end, these children who are born exposed to substances are one of the highest needs populations, but they're not currently being adequately served. Throughout the state, a large majority of children served in Early On are 2 years of age. More and more children are being referred and enrolled at 2 versus earlier in life. Investing early reduces the number of children receiving special education in the K-12 system and lessens the strain with both staffing and costs. We know that children who receive intervention at a younger age have increased positive outcomes. It is imperative to get more children referred and enrolled in Early On before age 2. A fully funded Early On system could support staff to focus on the highest needs populations by being present in hospitals and working with families to build positive relationships at the beginning of a child's life, connecting them to the services that they need. A fully funded Early On system could support a family advocate to connect with families on a personal level and support them in enrollment in other services. A fully funded Early On system could provide additional professional development to staff. A fully funded Early On system could support community education to help our families in Michigan better understand Early On, remove the stigmas, and connect them to the services sooner, all of which increase the positive outcomes for our children in Michigan. Today, we're asking for an increase in state Early On funding by $15 million for a total of $37.3 million. Setting our children up for success now better supports our state as a whole. An investment in Early On is an investment in our children and our future. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you all very much for being here to testify. We do have several questions, but if you'll allow me just a brief pause before we get into it. Representative Skaggs has some guests here in the audience that he would like to introduce. So Representative Skaggs, take it
Thank you,
away.
Chair, and my apologies early on, team, if you allow me this brief indulgence to introduce the We the People team from East Kentwood High School. They are the state champions in We the People. If you guys all want to stand up. East Kentwood won this for the second time in a row. It's a constitutional study and competition that takes place around the entire state. And House District 80 is known for its We the People teams from East Kentwood and East Grand Rapids have been battling back for generations. and just want to congratulate these young adults for the incredible work that they've done. It is Civic Education Week next week in the state of Michigan, and today in the Mackinac Room at noon, there will be a showcase of civic education, including a show of what these young adults can do in the study of the American Constitution and American history. So I hope that you will make it over there when this committee is over. Thank you, Chair, for this brief interlude. I really appreciate your support for this.
Absolutely, and congratulations to you. I was a champion in 8th grade, so I appreciate we the people, and congratulations to you on your accomplishment. And back to early on, again, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your very important and impactful testimony. We do have several questions from committee members. So to kick it off, Representative Price.
Thank you, Chair Weiss. My question was for Christy Callahan. I believe you when you tell me that the demand is there, that more infants and toddlers are eligible than our system can adequately serve right now, and that with that new requirement for universal lead screening, we'll have even more infants and toddlers being referred. I'm curious, when someone when an infant or toddler qualifies and we cannot serve them, what happens? And what are some of those needs that you see that are currently unserved? Thank you.
And so when a child is qualified, they are eligible, and we must serve them. No waiting lists are allowed. And so, unfortunately, what happens with inadequate support and services, our local systems make do. And folks, as Terry indicated, will get just monthly minimal services. And so we know that, so that's a significant issue, and thank you for that question. In addition, as Kay mentioned, and I think Victoria mentioned, there's more that we could do to find eligible children. And so families are there without knowledge of the system or with uncertainty about the system. And given the lack of strength in our systems, our intermediate school districts and local service systems don't have a lot of incentive to be very strong in their outreach due to, lack of funds to support staff.
Thank you. Representative Beeson.
Thank you, Chair. This is, just a quick question, and one of you guys can maybe answer. I don't understand why we're running this through MDE and not through DHHS. My sister is early 4 up in Boyne, and the story she tells me, but I just don't want it to be left to our school system, one more thing that we're implementing coming from a school board, family, and on the school board, like another program that we have to operate and maneuver through. Why do you guys think it's good to figure that out through the MDE and not through DHHS?
So I can jump in on that. Back in 1986, when the federal mandate came about, it was states could determine which agency was most appropriate for to serve as lead agency for Part C of IDEA. And Michigan determined that education was most appropriate due to the existing special education system that was already in place serving infants and toddlers under IDEA. And so that's why historically we went that direction. And another study conducted a while ago now, in 2007, really examined whether it would be beneficial to move our early intervention system over to public health, and it was determined that there was a stronger infrastructure and funding, even though it's not strong enough for birth to 3, but that education, since they already had a system in place and had supports under IDEA already, that was the best decision for our state. Not every state had state special education for birth to 3 prior to the mandate. Only 5 states did.
Thank you. Thanks for clarifying and knowing the days, because sometimes we get up here and we're like, hey, and they're like, I don't know, we'll have to get back with you, but thank you.
Thank you. I have a few questions. First, kind of to follow up on Representative Price's question, and I heard this just, again, we've shared a lot of direct stories. I've heard a similar story from a friend of mine who has a child with, who was diagnosed very young with autism spectrum disorder. They were living in California at the time, and received, according to her, really great in-home services. They moved back to Michigan, and they encountered lots of barriers, lots of issues, both in being able to get that diagnosis for their child, and also, once they had that diagnosis, and even though, again, they would qualify for additional services with that diagnosis, getting the same level of in-home care for their child that they had had in California, which is not great to hear, because we want to make sure that we're doing everything better than every other state, especially California. And so, and I know you talked about those increased investments. Can you talk through any other barriers that may exist? I think of like staffing, for example. Are there any other barriers that may exist if we were to just, like, magically, we had the revenue, we could get up to the full level of funding that was recommended, even beyond what the request is today? Are there any other barriers that would exist to being able to provide that kind of level of service?
Staffing is a concern, for sure. Funding is the number one priority, but we do need strategies to recruit and retain personnel to serve as early interventionists. I don't know if it would make sense to allow for a different kind of use of those 54D funds in certain areas who are really struggling with recruitment and staffing, but we do need assistance in that area as well.
I can also speak to the complication that your friend experienced. So up until very recently, and I'm not hopeful that recent changes have made any difference, but our major insurers, namely Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan and Blue Care Network, have required a very robust system of evaluation for children with autism that, in my personal opinion, violates parity law. So in order to diagnose a child with autism in the state of Michigan, if you have private insurance, you've had to get on a wait list at usually an academic medical center and be evaluated by 3 different providers, one of which is a pediatric specialist like me, a developmental behavioral pediatrician, a pediatric neurologist, or a pediatric psychiatrist, in addition to a psychologist and a speech and language pathologist. So you can imagine how long those wait lists are. At University of Michigan, children, when we did a recent chart audit, were waiting 9 to 12 months on average for an evaluation. So other private insurers have adopted similar processes dictating exactly what they need to see from a pediatrician or an evaluation team to bless the diagnosis of autism and reimburse services. And then, once a child is found to have a diagnosis, they are sent to their school system, and they have to completely redo an evaluation. Because a child who has a medical diagnosis of autism might not actually qualify for an educational diagnosis of autism, because unless that child is impaired enough in the classroom, they don't get services.
Thank you. And that was exactly her experience, what you just described, unfortunately. And additionally to that, kind of going back to that insurance piece, if a parent qualifies for early on services, can they supplement, if they have the insurance and the ability to pay for it, can they supplement some of that with some additional OT or PT, speech therapy, whatever that their child needs?
Yes, absolutely. Nearly all of them do, but it requires a lot, right? It's to go to a private OT or a PT. These are not people who come into your home. They're not offering services in a natural environment the way that an early intervention provider would be able to do. And so, of course, those things are valuable, but they really only are as valuable as like the adults in attendance are able to go and learn and then take those skills from the private OT or PT and bring them back to their home and translate them into their natural environment.
I hear that, and my experience too, I have twin toddlers. They don't qualify for early on, but do have some additional needs, and getting them to PT, OT, those wait lists, it's been a huge challenge.
And I am an occupational therapist by training, and I serve students in our district, as well as being the early on facilitator. And there's a huge challenge between getting kids the services they need in an outpatient environment in addition to having early on services. And remember, we're talking about two different levels of service, early on only and early on in special education students. So those are different situations and they get different professionals. But what we see is what Nikki had talked about with the natural environment. Kids go to outpatient therapy and the staff aren't necessarily working with the parents. The parents are the ones who are with that kid all day, every day. They have a much greater impact on that child's life than I as a therapist do, regardless of what my environment is. But if I'm in their home, I'm able to actually take what they're really doing, the things that they actually have in their environment, right? Because some kids don't have toys. Some kids live in less than ideal circumstances. We take all of that, look at where they are, meet their family where they are, and make that parent the advocate that they need to be for their family and to be the child's number one interventionist. So that's our goal, and it's a very different, it's a very different space than being an outpatient therapist. And that's why we feel so strongly and passionately about what we do in the homes and that natural environment.
I can actually, what you were saying too about my family did have to do outside OT and social work services. And at this point, he had his IEP at school, but that was drop-in service. He was 3 years old. We had no connection to that district at all. So I was having to drive him, and I also had an infant child at the time too. I had to drive him to speech every single week for 45 minutes with my infant with me. And then I had to drive him twice a week to OT, and I had to drive him once a week to social worker, and all having my infant child in tow. And we were fortunate enough that we did have medical insurance, so we were going through our insurance with the OT and social worker, but we still had a $20 copay. So we were spending $60 a week just on copays, plus the transportation, plus the time. If you had working families, that would not even be doable just because of the schedules that you would have to be trying to navigate all of these services.
Yeah, thank you for that. And going through similar circumstances, I completely understand the challenges that that are there for that. Just one more question, and thinking about kind of this transition period, and you've talked about a lot with this, some of the hiccups and hurdles that exist from this transition when you go from 3 to 4. Can you speak a little bit more about those next steps that families have to take when a child kind of ages out of early on? And do they leave with developmental plans to help their families set up similar connections in that public school space or into whatever they're moving into and what their next needs are?
That's a really good question, and I think the answer is somewhat dependent on which program they're in. So if you have an early on only child who is not eligible or doesn't have a connection with the special education system already, those children would be hopefully connected with community resources. But what are those? It depends on the area. So it could be, local library programming or other free services in the area where we can support educational development without providing service. I do believe that when children are early on only eligible, and in those places where there isn't a strong connection between the early on only staffing and the early on and special education staffing, often those kids fall through the cracks. They're not provided with services, and sometimes they could be eligible for special education services, but that referral was never made. So if a child has special education, that's a much more seamless experience because we already are part of the school district. So if I'm servicing a child who has special education already, I would just move them directly into our 3 to 5 programming. So there's a much stronger, cohesive, and we've worked really hard on that continuum so that feels much more seamless for families. But we're talking about different spaces and different places that don't have the same, they have two very different programs. Some are through MDHHS, or they have other services, but I've had kids in the past who were a year and a half who had severe delays, who I could have been servicing probably at age 6 months, and they missed a whole year of their time with me being a developmental specialist. So I do think there's gaps depending on which program you're talking about.
And then I would like to highlight some families that are early on only go to the K-12 system, and then their children are not even eligible or receive an evaluation until like around 3rd grade when they notice bigger gaps in the delays.
Thank you. Representative DeBoer.
For sure, it's a wonderful investment. The earlier we help a child, I just 100% believe in that. The more things are allowed to unwind, the harder it is to sew them back together. I'm wondering about the pediatricians and their information about early on. Is that well connected throughout? I would say probably the doctors are the most trusted sources of information and diagnosis for those parents and their little tiny person that they don't know what to do with. So can you explain that?
Absolutely. So pediatricians know about early intervention, and many do refer, but several barriers exist to adequately referring and connecting a family to early on. So first off, pediatricians in general should be doing developmental surveillance at every well child check. But families have a lot of things come up, and they come in when they can come in. So not every family is able to get to every well child check. And that means that there's a lot of other things to do every time the family comes in. And there already is, right? These visits are short, and you have to get through a lot. The second thing is that we do developmental screening at very specific visits. So 9, 18, and 30 months are the recommended ages at which we would do a formal screener where a parent would go through and fill out, yes, my child is pulling up on objects in the room and standing independently for 2 seconds and beating whatever, and that's where often if a family isn't aware of their child's delays, that's how a pediatrician would often pick up on it. Because there's a lot of other things going on in a pediatrician's office that prevent a pediatrician from being able to identify that a child has a motor delay. A lot of times, a child under the age of 3 isn't getting off their parent's lap in that room, no matter what you do. A child under the age of 3, like my son, might be screaming the entire visit. So, good luck trying to assess their language, right? So unless the parent comes into you and says, I think my child has fewer than expected words, or they fill out a developmental screener, the pediatrician isn't going to know that there's a problem in development. Mm-hmm. And so, then that kind of infrequent or, occasional missed appointment, if it happens to be a 9, 18, or 30-month appointment, then that developmental screening isn't getting done. Yeah. So pediatricians know about early on. The other thing is that we sometimes will talk to families about it, and families aren't yet ready to engage, right? They haven't heard about early on system. There hasn't been enough outreach in their communities. There's not, early on we're currently only identifying 4% of what probably should be 13% of our population. There's a hesitancy and maybe a distrust, and they're not ready to engage. And so there's delays there too. But pediatricians know about it and they refer, but they could do a better job. And it all goes back to, I think, Early on has just, again, been historically underfunded in this state, and so we haven't been able to do as much outreach as we would like. It's not as big a part of our local communities as it should be. You know, and you know, so I think any little bit to be able to enhance that piece, right? Make the services better so that the families who are engaging with Early On come back and say, I had this amazing experience. This was a wonderful system. You know, like if you're struggling, you know, they're recommending it to their friends and colleagues.
Yeah, you know, you said you were here on your own time. I know that is very, very precious. And that means you really care beyond your practice in helping kids and in coming to the legislative level to really make a difference at the state, on top of everything else you're doing besides you're a mother yourself. So I really respect that. I appreciate all of you taking time to share. I'm wondering if parents have to go through a bit of a grief process themselves with a diagnosis. And so facing that and signing up for something that is hard for them can take them time to accept. And as that clock is ticking, they're losing the time that could be helping that child. I'm wondering, you know, would it be good if we had like video presentation that a doctor could use to say, you know, there's this early on work, and here's a mom whose child had X, Y, and Z or whatever, and here's the therapist that worked with them, and they're going to talk a little bit about their in-home experience. And they could do that outside the doctor's time. It could be like the nurse puts that on before you come in or something, and help them kind of through that grief process on the way to accepting what's going to really help both them, their family, and their little child.
Sorry to interrupt, we are running really short on time, and we have another group to present. So if you want to answer that really briefly, and also like, I know we got like this up here, and I'm sure there are other resources. Maybe there are things that could follow up with the committee to share, that things that are shared with parents about the Early On program.
Absolutely, and we can stay after and talk to anyone who's interested to talk to us. But yes, you're absolutely right, and there's a lot of robust literature in the process that a parent goes through in terms of grieving a new diagnosis of developmental delay, disability, and/or autism. The idea that you had is a great one, and that's part of what we've been sharing, is that this child find and family outreach, these are the parts of the program that we really could use help in strengthening and expanding. And I'm sure my colleagues have probably a lot more to say about this, but we can certainly chat after.
Well, sometimes a human being on a video is better than a piece of paper, especially when you're going through something a little emotional. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you all again so much for being here and for your work and advocacy on this issue. We really appreciate it, and thank you to the parent who joined on Zoom as well.
Thank you.
Next up, we have a presentation on out-of-school time. So coming up to present, and again, apologies in advance if I pronounce anyone's name wrong, Aaron Skeen Pratt, Nicole Liggins, Grant P. Hagenauer, and Uriel Beth Yahweh to discuss out-of-school time.
Good morning. Thanks so much for the opportunity to present today. And I'm going to be very brief because I want our amazing presenters who are really on the ground and the out-of-school time experts to chat with you all. But just real briefly, Michigan After School Partnership is a coalition. We're working to ensure that all youth have equitable access to quality out-of-school time experiences. And that means our kindergartners to 12th grade. And I know that we've met with all of you and you're very familiar and you've actually they visited programs, which we really appreciate, and you've seen the looks and the expressions on the kids' faces. And I know that you also know how important these programs are to our education system. And I also know that you're aware that there's a high demand, right? For every one student in a program, 4 are waiting to get in. And a lot of the programs in your district have long wait lists. However, I will say that there are some bright spots, and we are so thankful to all of you for your support for out of school time. It's been amazing to go from 2020, where there was $0, to 2024, where there was $50 million. And we've been able to look at the governor's recommendation, and we're so thrilled that it is $50 million ongoing, and that will make a huge difference to the youth in this state. I will share that there's several materials at your in front of you that goes into evaluation of past competitive grant process rounds for this funding, as well as additional information on the power of after school. With that, if I may, if I could introduce this amazing woman who is next to me. She's a 9th grade student who participates and is a leader at Downtown Boxing Gym in Detroit. And she's going to give you a little bit of insight in terms of what she experiences within these programs. And we're going to want to move that mic just over there. There you go. And then press that button.
Research shows that students at DBG have a 25% advantage over their peers nationwide in believing they can succeed. This is no coincidence. When students aren't able to comprehend subject matters in school, they typically begin to shut down, creating a resentment towards education. When the pandemic took place, it was the hardest school year of my life, and I was ready to give up. I found it nearly impossible to comprehend the material I was meant to learn virtually. I came to DBG the following year and was able to fill in the learning gaps that I experienced during COVID. Subjects that I previously struggled with raised all the way up to an A by the end of my first semester. I received continuous one-on-one tutoring since I've started and have maintained a 4.0 GPA ever since. But it's not just the tutoring that's kept my grades up. I found purpose for my education since being here. I see my education as a powerful tool to contribute to my community. I feel connected and confident in my ability to create change. Since being at DBG, I've come to realize that all of what you do is either uplifting or pulling down the community, and I've been actively searching for ways to be a positive influence over my peers. To me, finding purpose and feeling connected to your community is part of the magic at DBG. I have an entire network of members who are pouring into my dreams, my visions, and helping me strategically think about what legacy I want to leave behind. I'm consistently pushed to dig deeper in my thoughts and create actionable plans towards who I want to become. Standing in front of you all is a dream come true, and a prime example of how DBG has connected my dreams to real opportunities. When I turned 18, I want to be directly involved in the politics of the city of Detroit. I want to advocate for my community and ensure that the people have a true voice in how the world around them is shaped. I am truly honored to be standing in front of the individuals who are doing this work on a daily basis. In 2023, I was elected as DBG's Student Council Vice President. I campaigned and advocated for what my contributions would be if I was elected and was blessed to receive the position. What work I do as Vice President on a daily basis is quite the load, so I can only imagine how much work you do to advocate for an entire state. I am one of 7 members who have decided to take charge of some of the issues we are seeing in our generation. The Student Council at DBG is starting an initiative called the Traversal Outspeak, where we will be traveling to schools and local organizations about the negative cultural influences we're faced with. The goal is not only to educate our peers, but to directly involve them in brainstorming with us on the solutions. We want to spread the knowledge we're receiving to more than just our students in the program. We came up with this idea because we felt we were constantly fed knowledge at DBG that we wanted to be more available to youth. We all need to see ourselves as active community members and take action towards a brighter tomorrow. I want to sincerely thank you all for for the work you're doing for after-school programming. I truly feel that with your help, programs like DBG can extend their reach to even more youth like me. Thank you.
Thank you. Did I mention that one of the things that after-school programs are known for is building confidence and supporting these amazing youth? So thank you so much for sharing that. And I should mention that Downtown Boxing Gym is also one of the grantees of the state funding for out-of-school time. Next, we have Nicole Liggins, who is with a community-based organization in Saginaw called Guided Grace and Youth Services, and she is also a recipient of the out-of-school time dollars. Nicole.
Good morning. You need to be able to hear me. Good morning. My name is Nicole Liggins, as Aaron said. I am the CEO and president of Guided Grace Family and Youth Services, which is a mental health agency in Saginaw, Michigan. And we provide unique interventions to children and families in Saginaw. We started our program, our nonprofit program, because we do have two sections and two sectors of our business. So our nonprofit was started in 2020, right during the pandemic, because we realized that we needed to do something to help our youth and our families. We were noticing an influx of people who were coming in with very unusual behaviors and challenges. So we knew we were going to launch, but we launched prematurely because we knew that we needed to get going. So we started in 2020 relying on faith and 23E funding. We were elated to learn in 2021 that we would receive those funds that were much needed from the state of Michigan for the OST program that I wrote, basically. After we had continued to grow and develop our program and provide hands-on interventions for youth K through 5, like art, boxing, sewing, music, animal therapy, recreational therapy, the science, the math, the literacy, social emotional learning, where they learn how to manage their own emotions and how to deal with them effectively without being distracted and overwhelmed. We also added for our 6th through 8th, we realized that they needed personal hygiene, they needed etiquette, some of the other components that we knew that they didn't have. So we went back to the lab and said, well, let's add that too. So we did things for them, like we started with some life skills. And so for them, as well as our 9th through 12th graders, we offer life skills with our employability and some job skills as well, with financial literacy. So I say that to say, we offer an array of things to our youth because we understand that in order for our youth to succeed, we as adults have to realize that we have to take accountability for some of the actions that we see in our community. And I realized that with some of the violence that I had seen in our community. In Saginaw, it's really no surprise that we had a problem with some of the violence. These funds really helped us to capture some of the children that were on the streets and really didn't have anywhere else to go. In 2023, the summer of 2023, in June, I got a call that there had been basically a mass shooting at an outdoor festival. Every major news network had covered it. 3 of the students who came to some of our sites were injured. 5 of those 5 other students had family members, 2 of which had passed away. And here we were there to pick up the pieces. Those funds helped us to be able to do that. Because now we're not just dealing with the children, now we're dealing with families, we're dealing with the community. And so, you know, you think about these funds here, they support the children and they support the out-of-school time, you know, the education, and of course we want to make sure that we support that, but we're also supporting the communities that need it. And in our case, in Saginaw, we need it. We are in desperate need. And so I was very grateful that these funds came our way, and we are very grateful that these funds are here in our community. And I'm in constant contact with Representative O'Neill. I'm in constant contact with Congressman Dan Kildee, who has come to our facility. Matter of fact, Representative O'Neill will be back at our facility on the 25th. He was there in January. He makes rounds because he understands that this is what the support is what we need. I'd like to share a brief story with you about a young lady named Dee Dee. And for me, this is why we do what we do. I was approached by a reporter who wanted to do a story. And I said, well, you know, I mean, I guess. He said, well, do you have someone who you think we could feature? And it was, you know, it's Matt Bach from the Mott Foundation wanted to do a story. And I thought, well, yes, I think I have a family who you could do. I mean, young lady. And so I gave him the name of this young lady, thinking that I knew her story. Well, as he got her mom and her, and they were in our conference room, and they're having, you know, the meeting with the photographer and that, and we're having an event on the lower level, and I do believe that actually Representative O'Neill was there with our mayor and things on the lower level, and so I'm back and forth, but I noticed the reporter kept coming in and out, and I thought to myself, why does he keep coming in and out? And at some point I thought, well, that's rude. Why does he keep coming in and out, right? And finally I asked the secretary, I said, do you notice he keeps coming in and out? And she said, yeah, I do. I think he's looking for Kleenex. And I said, Kleenex? And so after, he says to me, he said, I was just going to do a story on how after school funding helps the state of Michigan. But he said, after listening to the young lady, I need to do a story just on her. And I said, well, what did she say to you? So now I'm confused. Well, let me read to you Dee Dee's story. So this is an excerpt of what basically went in the article. She says, I went from all F's in school to being on the honor roll, Searle said, adding, she and her legal guardian, Cheryl Lee Hammond, also started therapy together, which made a big difference in their relationship and lives. After school and therapy helped me a lot. It helped me with my social skills and getting me out of the world. If it wasn't for after school, I probably would be dead because of the way I was living. I was homeless and I lived with friends for a while. In fact, it was my therapist who recommended that I get involved with the Guided Grace after school program because I didn't know anything about it. So then her mom or her caregiver goes on to say, Dee Dee is a lot more outgoing now. She used to lay in bed all day long, but now she gets it. I don't have to tell her to get ready for work or to get ready for school. Before we were bumping heads constantly, but now she's doing very good now. I'm so proud of her. The after-school program opened all new doors. Searle said before she lacked confidence and self-motivation, but now the sky is the limit. Now Dee Dee goes on to say, now I have so much stuff I want to do, she says, adding that now planning to go to college, I want to be a model, I want to be a psychiatrist, I want to be a doctor, a lawyer. I feel like I can just do anything now. I want to show people that I can go from where I came from to now I can do it all if I want to. You don't understand. I was going to kill myself, but now I want to live. Searle's story is a shining example showing that out-of-school time programming works. I had no idea, and this little girl who was getting all Fs and now was getting all As, she's a 12th grader, and I'm proud to tell you she is now the valedictorian. Now, this little girl, and I call her a little girl because I'm an old lady, I will tell you. Everybody's little to me if you're under the age of 20. I'm very hands-on with all the sites as much as I can be because I need to know that what we're doing works. She seemed infatuated when she would see me, and so I took a liking to her as well. I had no idea. But this works. This works. This works. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. Grant, do you want to go next?
Good morning, honorable House committee members. My name is Grant Hegenauer. I am the superintendent of the Frankenmuth School District, which has approximately 1,375 students. We are represented by the Honorable Matt Bierlein of the 97th District. What you're hearing today is the impact that OST is making with children throughout the state. It's not an urban, suburban, or rural issue. It is a Michigan children's issue. I'd like to tell a story a little bit of how we are utilizing these funds in Frankenmuth School District and how it's impacting more than just the children, but how the community perceives our children. The Explore and Soar program is a summer program that will be entering its second year. The pandemic caused learning gaps for students, and our district leadership team saw a way to help lessen these gaps and launch our first ever K-4 summer program. Over the last 2 years, we were awarded the Michigan Department of Education out-of-school time grant. These funds brought resources, materials, and opportunities to enrich the growing summer learning program. The level of funding has also allowed our organization to hire highly qualified educators and a staff to support our children, as well as increase the students we serve from 75 to 90 for the summer of this coming 2024. As you know, it's safe to say that kids usually don't look forward to spending their summer in school. Fortunately, that is not the case with our Explore and Soar students. The enthusiasm and commitment of the staff has fostered an environment of collaboration, inquisitiveness, and adventure that keeps kids wanting to come back. Due to the excitement from the students and the high interest from parents, all 5 sections in 2023 were filled to capacity and had a waiting list of 20 additional students. Last summer included 24 sessions with 5 sections, all rising grades of 1st through 5th, and 5 teachers. We also hired a librarian, which was on staff to make sure students had books in hand all summer. In addition, another instructor was brought in occasionally to work with students to develop critical thinking skills through coding and drone aviation. The Explore and Soar program was filled with opportunities for enrichment, which included writing and reading workshops, inquiry-based grammar, phonics lessons, math instruction. In addition, STEAM hands-on activities were included. All instruction was new content that was strategically planned to help students rise to the next grade while making learning fun and exciting. In addition to the curriculum, students headed out once a week on a learning adventure through our beautiful town of Frankenmuth. Local businesses and museums worked with our teachers to immerse students with hands-on learning opportunities that sparked creativity, knowledge, and also increased children's awareness of their own community. We also partner with the Frankenmuth Noon Rotary, which sent home students with a new book every week. These books were theirs to keep, and this was an amazing way to get books into our students' hands and help them foster the love of reading. Programs like Explore and Soar are reducing learning gaps at the elementary level. This is to provide all students a foundation needed to be successful later in life. This program was made possible entirely through the generous allocation of funds to the OST program. I thank you for your support, and the hope of level remains constant, if not increasing, to support Michigan's greatest commodity, its children.
As you can see, these are three examples of phenomenal programs, and I have to say that they are three of the 4,700 that we have across the state that are making a significant difference in the lives of communities, lives of children, in communities. And I also want to say that the $50 million from fiscal year '24, it did support over 140 organizations that resulted in 783 sites across the state providing after school, before school, and summer learning, and then we are expecting it to serve at least 67,000 youth across the state. So thank you again for the opportunity to present to you, and we really hope that we'll have the opportunity to see this funding as ongoing in the future.
Thank you so much. We are running a little short on time. We have a couple of minutes left. We do have 2 questions right now. If we don't have time to get to them, we'll submit them and follow up. But before we get to that, I just want to thank you all very much for coming to present. Special thanks to, is it Uriel? Special thank you to you, and I'm very excited to hear that you want to get involved in politics, and we should talk more about that, because I want you to get more involved in politics too. First up is Representative Kolazar.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for coming in today. I also, to Uriel, first of all, thank you for telling us about the downtown boxing gym, but also, when I was in 9th grade, I was trying to get the Nintendo 64 to work. You're testifying in front of the Michigan legislature. I have no doubt you're going to get to those future plans that you have, and you're definitely a rising star to watch, so thank you for being here today. For Aaron, I have a question for you. Since the state began investing in FY21 through the current fiscal year, has there been demand from potential grant applicants that exceeded available funding, and if so, by how much each year?
There has. So the first year, there was about $10 million in funding, and there was about $14.5 in requests. The second year, we had $25 million, and there was $42 million in requests. And for fiscal year '24, with the $50 million available, there was $78.4 million in requests.
Thank you. Vice Chair Morgan.
That essentially answered my question as well. I will just say thank you for sharing these stories. I think that's the side of this work that we don't always get to hear, to know how the dollars that we're allocating as legislators are really impacting people's lives. So that's really so important. I attended the Boys and Girls Club when I was a kid, and I know that it made a huge difference because for some of us whose parents were working, we didn't really have anywhere else to go. And so it was, so just thank you so much.
Thank you. And last but not least, Minority Vice Chair DeBoer.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just so appreciated hearing your stories, and the words that come to me are arise and shine. let your light shine. And that's what each one of you is doing. And Uriel, you're at the much more at the beginning of that stage, but you have a light in you that you're shining to help other students navigate the culture and what's going on, and you're wise about it, and your trajectory is bright. And also, Nicole, as you thought over the situation in Saginaw, you didn't just say that was too much, that's too overwhelming, that's too hopeless, I'm not going to do anything. No, you said, I need to step in, I need to organize, I need to expand, I need to help, I need to invest. And you have helped so many more, that stories that you don't even know, of people that have found your light and are becoming a light themselves to the world. And thank you also. Administrators aren't always so glittery and frontline with stories, but if we don't have them making the decisions for everything else that happens down the chain, we don't help people. So each one of you is so inspiring in your own way. Thank you, and keep it up.
Thank you, and if it wasn't already said enough, thank you all, each of you, so much for your powerful testimony today and speaking about this, and it helps us really when we're making critical decisions on the investments that we make for our state. So thank you for being here today. I don't think we have any. We did have one card submitted supporting, I believe, funding for early on and out of school time, but not wishing to speak. Matt Gillard from Michigan Children's. I don't believe we have any absent members, correct? All right. And with no other business to come before the committee, the House Appropriations Subcommittee on School Aid and the Department of Education is adjourned.